Just finished making my fruited scones now. I'm going to make some savoury scones. Today I'm going to do some cheese scones. So in exactly the same way, I've taken 225 grams of self-raising flour. If I didn't have self-raising and only had plain, I'd use 225 grams of plain flour plus probably a teaspoon or maybe a teaspoon and a half of baking powder in with it. I've then taken 50 grams of butter or hard margarine and I've rubbed it in using the rubbing in method until it looks like fine breadcrumbs, so that when I give the bowl a shake, any large lumps come to the surface and I can get those incorporated. If I only had soft margarine or baking margarine, I would use that, but I'd need to do the rubbing in method quite quickly because it would melt very quickly and would be incorporated very, very quickly. So to the mixture of breadcrumbs then, I'm going to make cheese scones. Now you may or may not have this at home, and so if you don't, it's perfectly fine to not use them. I've got some dried mustard powder. I'm going to use about a teaspoon of dried mustard powder. Mustard and cheese go really, really nicely together. So I'm going to add that in. And also, because I have it, but again if you don't have it, you don't have to use it, a little bit of cayenne pepper. It's a really, really hot pepper, so I'm not going to use much. I'm just going to use a small sprinkle of that. It's not measured in teaspoons, it is really a very small amount. A pinch of that is fine. Now the recipe would suggest that you use some salt in with this. Because I've used salted butter when I rubbed in, I'm not going to use salt, because the salted butter along with 50 grams of grated cheese is going to give more than enough salt for this recipe. So 50 grams of grated cheese also goes in to the bowl. I then take the knife that I'd used to butter my bread and just mix those ingredients around. Just really to make sure that the mustard and the cayenne pepper is not all in the same place. I'm going to take 150 millilitres of milk, and in the same way I'm going to add it gradually. I'll start off by adding about 2/3 of the milk, then I'll stir it around using the knife that I used to butter my bread. And again, I'm looking for this to form some large lumps, and so that there won't be very much flour, loose flour, left at the bottom of the bowl. So there is some nice large lumps forming. However, there's still a lot of flour left at the bottom, so about another 2 tablespoons of milk go in and stir. And then again, I've got a little bit of flour still left on the bottom, but quite nice large lumps now. I'm going to just add about 3/4 of a tablespoon of milk in and stir that together. At this stage, in exactly the same way that we did with the fruited scones, and exactly the same way as we did the fruited scones, I've got a greased baking tray here, which I've lined with greaseproof paper, but you can grease it in, that's fine. And I've preheated the oven to two 10 degrees fan, 230 degrees electric, and about gas mark 8 or 7. Okay, so exactly the same way as I did with my fruited scones, I'm going to tip this mixture onto my clean work surface and just bring this together. It is not a dough, as I said last time with the fruited scones, so I'm just bringing it together. Now this is a little bit sticky, so I already know that I'm going to need to add about a teaspoon of flour to the mixture, just so it doesn't stick to the cutter when I'm cutting this out. So I brought it together, and in exactly the same way as with the fruited scones, I'm going to pat it down to about 2 to 3 centimetres thick. Try and keep it the same thickness at either end, so you don't go heavier on one side than the other. You can again use that check, so I'm using that little point there between my 2 knuckles, that's about 2 to 3 centimetres. Again, I've got a 5 centimetre cutter to cut these out with here. However, if your cutter is slightly larger than that, it's not a problem, it just will make less scones. And I'm going to cut these out and place them to the baking tray. Now one thing I've done, I've added all my flour, all my cheese into the mix here. If you wanted to, you could absolutely keep a little bit of the cheese back, and when you glaze these scones you can add the cheese onto the top of the scones so that you've got a little bit running through the mixture and a little bit of grated cheese on top. That's your decision. I might add a little bit extra cheese on at the end because I know that does improve the look of them. Again, I've brought the dough back together when I've got as many out as I can. Try to keep it about the same thickness. and they're going onto the tray. And again, roll it back together, or bring it back together, pat it out. Now with the sweet scones, I had enough to make one extra little scone. However, I'm going to bring this back to a ball, about the same thickness as the other scones, and you can see that this would be so very small on here that this wouldn't actually cook in time. This would be burnt before these were cooked. So I'm not going to cook that one. I don't like wasting food, but on this occasion, that one isn't going to work. You then take a little bit of the milk you've got left over, glaze the top with the milk. And then they're going to go into that hot oven. They should take, depending whether it's preheated properly or not, between about 8 to 15 minutes, again depending on the size of your cutter that you've used. Now, as I said to you, I've forgotten how to do my cheese in here. I'm going to find probably another 5 to 10 grams of cheese and just sprinkle a little bit of cheese on the top of these. They're then going to go into the oven, and I'll show you how these look like, what these look like when they come out. So these have come out of the oven. They've taken about 12 minutes to cook. They were, again, like the fruit scones, quite thick, so they've taken a little bit longer than if they were a bit thinner. They've, as you can see, risen really nicely, and as I said to you I was going to, I have, before I put them in, just sprinkled them with a little bit of cheese. So the tops are quite golden, particularly where the cheese isn't. The cheese, if you've added it on top, will have melted and hopefully make it look attractive on the top. Again, as you can see, where they've risen, you've got a nice mark on most scones as to where you will be just gently pulling them apart to eat them. So they're well risen, they're cooked through, and hopefully will be really nice served while they're still warm, not hot, but warm with some butter. They shouldn't be doughy on the inside, but because there is cheese in them, you may find, particularly while they're still warm, some of the melted cheese is in there, so it might look a little bit different to the fruited scones on the inside. But they should not be doughy, they should just have a little bit of melted cheese in there. Hope you enjoy these ones.